Hi, 皆さんおはようございます。So, since it's Slush, I'm going to present in English. I was hoping partly to present in Japanese because I'm going to talk about Japan and what I think is a potential future for creating a lot of really cool companies like Sony, and when at the time they invented the Walkman. So the initial title of my talk was Why Japan Can Build 1,000 Sony, and I changed it to how to do it. Because I think you hear a lot about the problems, but you don't hear so much about solutions. So I want to bring solutions and ideas how things can be done. So quickly about me. So I came last night from Hong Kong and Shenzhen. It takes a flight that takes about 4 hours. So as you see, it's not very far. Shenzhen is today recognized as the Silicon Valley for hardware. But it took me 4 hours to come, but it took me about 15 years to get there, starting with Tokyo, Seoul, Beijing, and eventually Shenzhen for the past 3 years. So living in all those different ecosystems, I learned a lot about what makes an ecosystem interesting, active, and what can really foster innovation. Also spent some time in Silicon Valley, in Singapore, in Malaysia, and these days I travel a lot worldwide to find startups to invest in through Hacks. So quickly about us, so Hacks is an investment company. We're part of a global fund of $300 million called SOSV. We're one of the most active seed investors in the world. Hacks is the hardware branch of that company. We have location in San Francisco and Shenzhen. We have biotech branch. And we have also another branch focused on social and mobile. So we're quite global. We have, I think, fairly good perspective on what's going on, and particularly because each of those operations are accelerators trying to attract global companies and help them grow as we also invest in later stages. So Hacks is in Shenzhen and San Francisco. Shenzhen was our first branch. We started it because it helps companies go from prototype to launch, thanks to an amazing ecosystem designed for that. And the branch we opened in San Francisco about a year ago is to help companies scale. Actually, Nomiku, that spoke a bit earlier, was part of a very first program about 5 years ago, and it's gone a long way since then. So the advantages of Shenzhen are really like superpowers for startups. And the number one superpower is actually speed. You don't have time to wait for the market. You have to get there before competitors do, and you have to do it fast and in the most capital efficient way possible, and Shenzhen can really bring you that. So many of our startups coming from Silicon Valley tell us that in a week in Shenzhen, they do as much as a month back home. So the idea behind Hacks is really to combine world-class startups with world-class resources. And what's interesting in the context of Japan is that the R&D resources could be in Japan, just like for other companies. For us, they are in Canada, in UK, in Singapore, in China, in many other places. But then combining with the ecosystem in China and the appetite for innovative products on the many early adopters in the US market can really give you very strong advantages. That also means that a team of maybe 3 or 4 people has to have this vision of thinking very, very globally. So we've done about 200 investments, about half of them from US and Canada, about a quarter from Europe. China is a growing share. Sadly, we had very few from Japan, and I'm also here to see if we can find more and encourage more founders to start companies this way. We invest in consumer, health technology devices, industrial IoT, and enterprise IoT. This is a quick trailer to show the variety of projects that came out of Hacks. Actually just finished the program last November, so they just came out. This is an example of a robot. As you can see, it's not a humanoid robot, it's a service robot that cleans the windows of tall buildings. There's a lot of tall buildings and a lot of windows to clean. M5 Stack is a modular IoT solution to help automate a lot of things in offices or industry. This is an exoskeleton to help relieve back pain. Low-cost industrial robots with computer vision for less than $10,000, about 10 times cheaper than what's out there. A robot to learn foreign languages for education. That's a robot that will help you if you have pets. This is a non-contact monitor for babies. This is an activity and wellness sensor that tracks posture, breathing, and activity. A new type of sensor that can track your emotions. Headphones to help you focus. Light therapy that can help you sleep. Hydration tracker. Energy storage that doesn't explode. Blood testing on the go. Agri-tech sensors. Accessories that can plug into all sorts of devices. Smart and connected breathalyzers. And finally, in the VR space, this is a camera that can record not only 3D video, but also 3D sound for a more immersive experience. So you saw about a dozen companies, and from that, can you really tell which ones are from which country? It's almost impossible. Probably about a third are actually from China in this particular video. But that shows that when you have a good product, it's actually globally relevant. So some of our startups have done very well. I won't go into the details, and we have a number of co-investors. The most popular and the most visible ones are the ones doing consumer products. We've run a lot of Kickstarter campaigns, and 10 of them entered the world's top 100, raising over $1 million. This is one of the early companies, was in the same batch as Nomiku. It's a company called MakeBlock. This company actually just raised $30 million and announced a partnership with SoftBank to distribute their education robots in Japan. Interestingly, that partnership actually came through relations we built with distribution globally. But more about how to create those new Sony. So recently, actually, we had a lot of visits the other way from Japan. A lot of people came to see us. NHK came to do a documentary about Shenzhen and hacks. People from METI, from NEDO, from Forbes Japan, from Mitsubishi, UFJ Research, from Nikkei, came over to figure out how come China is booming so much and Japan is not, at least in the hardware space. And we discussed with many of them, and they saw also that the image they had of China needed a massive update. People think of old China, all done by hand, lots of people in factory, but they discovered the new China with robots everywhere. They discovered Huaqiangbei, that's 20 times bigger than Akihabara. It's the biggest world's electronics component market. And that's where we are, actually. Our office is right in there. The silicon has really moved out of Silicon Valley and is now in Shenzhen. They discovered that those companies, Baidu, Tencent, Huawei, Xiaomi, are all doing lots of hardware as well. That in Shenzhen, there's DJI, that is now the world's leader in drones. That's one of the first times a Chinese company is a leader in a high-tech sector with almost no close competitor. And we think this is just the first of many to come. If you go to Shenzhen Airport, you might come across this robot. It's a security robot. So how about Japan? Japan obviously has lots of electronic companies, and it's been restructuring, but is really having a hard time because of how large they are, with coming up with really disruptive and interesting new products. So why is there no new Sony? So easy answer is lack of entrepreneur. But then you can go, the 5 whys of Toyota, like why? Why is there a lack of entrepreneurs? And I think it boils down to 3 things, is finding out the right opportunities, increasing the upside. That means that if you're successful, your success can be bigger, and limiting the downside means if it doesn't work, at least you're not like bankrupt forever. And the problem is really in the ecosystem. So because I've lived in many places, I've finally built some kind of analysis of what is an ecosystem. And I think it boils down to 5 elements. First is the market access, market size. Second is capital access at every stage. Third is talent, local or imported. Fourth is regulation. Fifth is the community. And I'll go into detail of what that means. People tell you about Silicon Valley, about China, but Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley, China is China. You cannot replicate a billion people market. You cannot replicate 60 years of reinvestment in technology. So what can you do that can actually be replicated? And I think, obviously, those two have crazy advantages. They have huge markets. So if you win, it works really well. And if you fail, in the US, you can find other jobs, you can join other companies, you can start other companies. And same in China. It's not the case for almost everywhere else. So you cannot just apply the lessons from those two countries. You have to look at other places. Unfortunately, when do people start companies? They start companies when everything is really bad and there's no jobs, there's no choice, or when things are very great and they feel that even if it doesn't work, they have other options. The problem is that Japan and France, where I'm from, is only in the so-so area where the economy is not great and it's not so bad that people actually have no choice. So what can you learn from? I think you can learn from those rising stars. So Israel, Canada, and actually France are rising stars for technology. At CES, the Consumer Electronics Show taking place every January in Vegas, this year France was incredibly well represented. 3 years ago, they had 40 startups. This year, they had 238 startups. And this logo was everywhere, and you couldn't see almost any other country as strongly represented. All under this label, La French Tech. So now back to the ecosystem elements. So if you target local market, by nature, you're limited. But in Japan, with the economy, you're limited to what you have here. If you expand your vision to include US or China or other markets, it makes your company potentially more attractive for investments, more attractive for people joining you on a bigger mission. Capital, Japan has improved a lot its ecosystem. There's more angel investors, there's more seed, there's some growth, there's some IPOs. The IPOs are not big, it's almost like a funding round, but the problem is the lack of M&As, lack of large M&As. M&As are great because founders continue to work maybe for 1-2 years, employees make money, founders make money, and then they can reinvest in the ecosystem and start a new company. That's what happens in Israel, for instance. There's been a lot of exits, and all those people who have had large exits are now investing and starting new companies in the ecosystem. That's what happened in Silicon Valley as well. Recently, in Israel, Mobileye got acquired for 15 billion. This money is largely going to go back into the ecosystem. In France, this founder started a very large internet provider and decided to support the ecosystem beyond investments. He's just about to launch the world's biggest startup campus. It's opening in 2 days. It's a space for 1,000 startups converted from a train station. He invested personally $270 million to do that. Talent. So Japan has lots of great designers, great engineers. This is famous everywhere. The problem is really that when you build a company, it's not just the feasibility that you have to cover, the technical feasibility. It's also desirability, human factors, and the business viability. And for that, you need also marketers. And you need entrepreneurs evaluate the business opportunities. So the problem is that the education system is not really encouraging that. This is a recruiting event at Toshiba, and I'd like to contrast that with Canada. This is a university in Canada called University of Waterloo, one of the best universities in the country. They do what they call cooperative education. They have 20,000 students spending 3 semesters in companies doing real jobs in thousands of companies. So this activity of doing internships, getting real life experience means that by the time they graduate, they're not discovering a job and then being moved from one place to another until they settle on some position. Other aspect of talent is overseas life, overseas experience to get perspective. Most top universities require overseas internships, and that gives a lot of broader perspective. So people from NATO recently came to Hacks, and I got them to meet one of our recent founders, founder of a Japanese guy, founder of a company called Walkies, currently in our accelerator program. He used to work at Dentsu for over 10 years, then he decided to do a PhD in Canada. And he said that the problem in Canada, and actually the problem in Japan, the reason he didn't start in Japan is that Nihon kara sekai wa mienai. And he said, but coming to Hacks, he could get a much broader global perspective. Hacks kara sekai wa mieru. And this is something that Dr. Nakamura, Nobel Prize in Physics, also said. He said, leave not forever, but leave to get perspective on the pros and cons so that you can come back with better ideas. And I think the barrier is largely in the mind. So maybe you saw that video that went around online of you do a little circle around an ant and gets really confused by the smell of the ink and it thinks it's trapped. But after exploring long enough, it goes out. And I think the barrier is also in the mind. I wasn't sure if it was a good idea to use that metaphor, so I talked to some of my visitors. I said, do you think it's okay I say that in Japan? And they said, actually, no, I think you're wrong. This is not the way it is. You should have not one ant, you should have 3 ants, because they're all looking at each other and they see nobody's leaving the circle, so they keep going around and around. And I think it's quite true. And the people who have been very successful in the Japanese market are people who left the circle. Tomoko Namba from DNA did an MBA at Harvard. Founder of Rakuten, same. The founder of SoftBank studied in Berkeley. They went out of the circle, they got perspective, and they got different mindset. Last thing is about using English. Also really important. And I'm not saying learning English, because everybody learns English. It's really about using English. I was discussing with my visitors, and we're doing most of the meeting actually in Japanese. My Japanese is far from perfect, but at the moment I told them, hey, what do you think about this? Everybody started to speak English. And the English was totally good enough to communicate. So it's really about fostering that confidence rather than learning the language. Talking about regulations, so things that help on the startup level is how you can create close companies, how you can hire, fire, also immigration. You probably know or heard of the fact that about half of the unicorns, the billion-dollar companies in Silicon Valley, actually founded by immigrants. Unemployment, how you deal with unemployment can also be a benefit. For example, in France, you have between 4 and 24 months of benefits even when you're starting a company until you get salaries. So that's a massive safety net. There's even an agency to help entrepreneurs. The community, so there's events and spaces. So I think Slush plays a big role in that. So kudos to you guys for connecting the world through Slush. But having good role models is also really important. In hardware, there's one guy I think doesn't get enough credit, but will be speaking I think today or tomorrow, Ziwasa-san from Cerevo. He's a guy who used to work at Panasonic and created his company because he wanted to create not the next screen, next plasma screen, but he wanted to create really original products. He went to China at a time where he was speaking no English and no Chinese. And I think that's a very inspiring example because now his company is very successful. Nakazawa from UpQ also did the same, went to Shenzhen, sourced products, redesigned some, and launched like 2,000 products in the Japanese market. And MakeBlock founder Jason Wang, okay, you would think, oh, it's easy for him, he's Chinese. Yeah, but he didn't speak much English at the beginning. And now more than 3/4 of his sales are international sales. And he's starting business in Japan. Communities, so other things is mentors, networks, because 90% of problems are really solved by other entrepreneurs. So connecting people more tightly is really important. At Hacks, we built a program to help through different phases on strategy, on building resources, launching with marketing, and then scaling. And startups can support each other in addition to us helping them out. In our office, we have not only 20 full-time experts, but about 100 founders doing hardware on an alumni network of 600 people. Rehiring, also something very important. I mentioned that the downside has to be limited. The problem in Japan is that if you quit your job at Panasonic or Sony or wherever and try a company, maybe you can't go back. You don't have the safety net of unemployment. You don't have the safety net of going back to your company. And people don't hire so much, large companies don't hire so much people with startup experience. That's also a big problem. And in France, again, there's a regulatory backup that you can take sabbatical and your company has to take you back if you want to by the time your sabbatical ends. Last thing is promoting. So I mentioned that the French tech label is actually a government label that decided to put together to give more visibility to what was going on. So I think I'm over time. So I'd like to wrap up with quick suggestions that summarize this way. So for the market, you cannot change the size of the Japanese market. What you can change is your mindset. You can change by thinking globally and thinking bigger ideas. Capital, you cannot change the appeal to VCs. What you can do is encourage entrepreneurs to reinvest because they have smarter capital and they can support beyond cash. Talent, co-op education, overseas experience, using your English. And I commend really all the Japanese speakers who come here and present in English for that. Regulations, maybe update on employment laws or find things around sabbaticals. And on the community, promote more those role models that are recent and have recent experience and can be closer to new entrepreneurs. As well as value startup experience for large companies. Many people talk about open innovation in Japan, but large companies don't hire people with startup experience. How do they expect to bridge the gap? That won't work. And then communicate around what's happening. If you look at software, it's really a missed opportunity for Japan. Like it's really dominated by US companies. And if you think really beyond, it's actually really a problem for the ecosystem because it's almost like they came with the black ships to open the market and now they're literally bleeding away the Japanese market from advertising, online advertising dollars that go to pay Silicon Valley engineers. That's really what's happening. But hardware is a giant opportunity, and Japan can take it. And it's not Japan versus other countries. You have to think really it's a combination. Japan plus China plus US of combining world-class startups with world-class resources. So I think Japan is world-class, and I think it's time to act like it. So if I go back to this metaphor of those three ends going around, I think it will only take a few to really convince that it's possible to look beyond. So if you think you're working on the next Sony and you would like it to become a global company, please come and talk to me. Thank you very much. Domo.